And yeah, welcome. It is September 9th, 2022. I'm Brett Nachman, your host for Canvas. Most of you I know have joined us for the past at our College Autism Network Virtual Association of Scholars meeting. Certainly, there is a lot that we cover during this time, including just sharing resources with one another, sharing some news and updates here at College Autism Network, but also a featured presentation. And you may have been aware from our email yesterday that unfortunately, Caden Stockwell is under the weather. So we'll be presenting at a later time and wishing Caden well. And instead, Brad Cox and myself will be presenting about our new research study. So kind of assembling this last minute, but I'm glad we still have the space. And there's a common thread here because as Caden was going to talk about the notion of the importance of honoring the holistic student experience that is central to our conversation for today. We know many of you are very much student-centered in your work, so we hope that this is a fruitful space for you in terms of having those dialogues. I'm going to share a few updates with all of you as it pertains to College Autism Network, and then turn it over to all of you to share some resources. But we know almost all of you, if not all of you, are on our Canvas listserv. Please be signed up for that. That is in our meeting. A link to that is in our meeting agenda, and I'll put the meeting agenda link in the chat in case you need to access that. Our College Autism Summit is very fast approaching, so we are ready to take Vanderbilt by storm in good ways, Dave. It's going to be all good with all of us from the College Autism Summit and network community. So we're getting very close to that. And we want to remind folks that the early bird registration deadline is September 15th. So if you haven't signed up, please make sure to do so earlier if you'd like to get a discount. And certainly there are benefits through being a CAN member in the sense of a paid membership. So there are some additional perks to that. So that's the advertising part. That
let me add one little bit to that advertisement.
Yes, please.
So I think Lee sent out a notice about this not too long ago, but if you are planning or thinking about coming, could you please book your hotel room like now? Because you can still cancel those things right later on, but if you all don't, if we don't meet the contracted room requirements that we booked the group rate for that number of rooms, then the College Autism Network actually has to pay the difference. And they take that, I think it's a 1 month, 30 days. They take that slice of how many rooms we've got 30 days out. So if you haven't booked a room yet, please do so. And if you got to do so and then you need to back out later, I think they can do that in ways that don't cost you any money, but will save us some good money. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Brad. Really important to remember that part. We are at the point, though, where we would love for you all to use this as a space to share any resources with one another. If there's new articles that you've came across, it doesn't have to be a journal article or scholarly. It could be a news article, something, a resource that you've come across, something that you're excited to share. This is also sometimes a celebratory space. If there's something really awesome that's unfolded in your line of work. Yeah, so we're going to open this up to if folks have things that they want to share with one another.
It's not all, oh, go ahead. It's not all that exciting of an article, but my dissertation was finally published after like a very long time. So I'll again, I would have done a lot of things differently now that I am not a doc student, but I guess that's the point. I'll put it in the chat, but fair warning, it's not like groundbreaking or anything all that exciting.
Go ahead, Brett.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, let us remind Jess, though, that you were our researcher of the year last year with our summit. So we cannot forget that. Okay.
But I was not when I did my dissertation. So just remember that.
Fair enough.
And the regrets afterwards and the things like, oh, I would have changed all that. I've never heard a person come out of their dissertation and saying like, oh yeah, no, I just nailed that perfectly. It doesn't happen. So I'm sure it's excellent.
They used to tell me the dissertation is the worst thing you ever write because everything gets better after that. It's not to say your dissertation's bad. It's awesome. It got passed and published and all those things, but it just keeps getting better from there. Speaking of getting better from there, I will celebrate that my autism and employment study that I talked about like, a year or so ago, did receive funding from the Winter Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research, who did not fund my dissertation, but did fund this post-PhD project. And so now it lets me hire autistic community research assistants, like non-academic folks. And if anyone has any resources for training research assistants that you recommend in qualitative research, I would welcome those. I'm not that worried about it, but one of the other funders I applied to was a little worried about it. I know we had a really good convo on the listserv about convincing funders of a lot of things. So yeah, I guess I'm mostly looking for that reason. People say, you can't have community research assistants. I'm like, yes, I sure can.
Congratulations. Be sure if there are any specific links or your email address that you want to share with folks, please just go ahead and put that in the meeting agenda so we can make sure that everybody has that. Awesome. Other things worth celebrating or other news or resources. This is great. I feel like now, because of all the amazing accomplishments, that it's like, oh, what am I going to share? Is that going to be significant enough? No, I definitely encourage that. We set the standard so high with the funding and dissertation being published.
And I will note that there have been several dissertations that have been announced over the Canvas listserv that have happened over the last year or so. So if ever you're in a spot when you have published, or even when you just finish your dissertation and willing to share, I know that those are fun reads for those of us who check out the listserv regularly.
Absolutely, Brad. Anything else from folks? All right, well, if there are items that come to mind, feel free to drop that in the chat, and we can definitely incorporate that into our meeting minutes as well. So at this point, we are going to transition to our main focus for today. And certainly we know that Brad and I have been very present in these meetings as being on the CAN leadership team, and we really want to create a space with Canvas where we don't do as much talking, but based on how things played out, obviously we still wanted to have a meeting for today, and it serves as a really good opportunity for us to talk about a project that actually is going to be involving so many of us in the College Autism Network community to gather information that's going to support us in our respective lines of work. So we're going to turn it over. Brad will, I'll be starting us off, I think, and then I'll be turning it over to Brad. And of course, me hosting the meeting and taking notes and now sharing a presentation gives me a little bit of anxiety in messing something up, but I will be sharing my screen so we can cover our presentation.
No, Brett, I need to be able to share my screen too. If you could give me authority to do so, I will handle that. You'll
handle that part. Thank you. Thank you for letting.
For that matter, I just made a change like 30 seconds ago, so I think we probably need to use the one that's on my computer.
Okay, so yeah, you'll go ahead and share your screen, Brad, and we'll take it away.
Excellent. All right.
All right. Thanks, Brad. So we're going to utilize the time today. Certainly Brad and I are going to be talking a little bit, but we really are going to invite a lot of conversation and questions and comments. So feel free to chime in as you'd like. So Brad and I, along with our wonderful research team, and one of our team members, Emily, is here today. Hi, Emily. and other folks comprise what we call project pieces, which is Postsecondary Education, Autistic College Students' Experiences of Success. That's the best we could do with the acronym, but we're excited about it. This is a project that's been in development for this past year, but quite honestly is really a reflection of years of inquiry and trying to make sense of how do we gather more collective insights about the holistic aspects of autistic college students' journeys. So Brad and I are going to talk about the inception of the project and ultimately the fact that we're rolling it out right now. This is our first week in which we're launching it, a national survey of undergraduate autistic college students in the United States, with hopes as it expands over time to broaden it outside of those spaces. So if you can change the slide, Brad, thank you. So our outline for today, we're going to share a little bit of what many of us know, which are what are some issues that face the world of autism higher education research, describe the context that situates our study. We're going to go through our survey instruments so all of you are better familiarized with what students are filling out and to hopefully have a greater appreciation for it and can address any questions or issues. We are going to be obtaining your feedback on that. And we also want to discuss recruitment, because this is a study that, even though it's only several of us who are spearheading it, so Brad and myself, our research team, our advisory board, this is really meant to be a collective effort to understand autistic college students nationally. So, and this is an illustration of the flyer. We will be sharing that more through our listserv, and we'll present this survey link in the chat, because we really are going to be hoping that each of you can contribute to this through your respective spaces. Brad, I think I'm turning it over to you, and I will be monitoring the chat, and we'll take it from there.
Wonderful, thanks, Brett. So we'll talk you through several things here, but I want to give you a little bit of why this came up. And really, it came up, frankly, with our dissatisfaction with the way in which the research to date has been done, or at least the opportunities for research to really expand and to improve in the next several years. And that's in part because of some limitations in the current research. So let's start with the samples. These samples, and I don't think this is going to surprise anyone here, right? That these samples are incredibly small. In most recent literature reviews, the size of the samples range from something like 1 student to 22 among qualitative studies, and that with the exception of the one data set, and we'll talk about this later, and I imagine you all can, or many of you can guess what that data set is. You know, heck, if you want to throw that in the chat, let's see how well folks know what. The one, with the exception of this one data set, there has only been one study in the last 5 years that has included actual autistic college students with 100 students or more. And actually, I think it might have even been 99. So there's one study that had 99 or 100 students. And then there's one other study that has more than 100 autistic college students. Anybody know what that other study is? The big data set that a lot of people use. It's a little bit older. Okay, it's 4 letters and a number. Somebody want to help me out here? Oh my gosh, I'm trying to be interactive and I'm getting no love. So the NLTS2 is the big one that has. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, appreciate that. So the NLTS2, National Longitudinal Transition Study 2, is the one that gets the most kind of publicity, but it has some problems that we'll talk about later on. But with those 2 exceptions, that and then some of the recent information from UCLA and the Higher Education Research Institute and McLeod's work from Indiana, that the vast majority of these samples are incredibly small. They're also incredibly homogeneous. They tend to come from 4-year institutions. They tend to come from privileged backgrounds, white, male, upper middle class type folks. And that leads us to draw whatever conclusions we can from those data or from those samples that aren't necessarily applicable beyond the specific population who is in that study. And really, that means that an awful lot of people are being underrepresented in this research, and we need to do a better job of trying to incorporate those diverse identities, perspectives, and experiences. Currently with the data, our data largely is idiosyncratic. You all have seen how many different studies are looking at so many related things, but using different instruments, or looking from slightly different perspective, or using somewhat different research questions that all kind of touch on the same thing. But those idiosyncrasies make it really hard for us to cross over and do comparisons across the different studies. And so I think in part because of that, we're seeing a lot of duplication or at least overlap, when in reality, I think some of those things could be directly compared from study 1 to study 2 if we had consistent data. Also, again, with remarkably few exceptions, almost all of our data is cross-sectional, so it's one time only. It's also disconnected or de-identified, meaning like the data we've got there is the only data that we're going to have for that student or for that study, where it makes it difficult to follow up with those students or to ask questions later on. And then one of the things that Brett and I noted in our lit review, gosh, I don't know what it was, a couple of years ago, Brett, and I think it was published in 2020, that we were taken back by the number of times that studies of or about, or that speak to the autistic college student experience actually drew their data from somebody other than autistic college students. Now, in some ways and sometimes that's totally appropriate when you have a study about stigma, that you might ask students' peers about, how they feel about autistic college students. But we also found a number of studies that look at parents or faculty or staff or caregivers or high school guidance counselors or whomever they may be, but again, talking about these students without actually hearing from those students. And we found that to be problematic as well. The last thing that we see as problematic is the recruitment. And this recruitment is happening all over. And if you are part of the listserv, you have seen these recruitment advertisements, but they are all idiosyncratic. They have their own unique qualifying characteristics. They are often very much whomever you can get, those convenient samples that are at your institution or whoever happens to respond to your call for participants. And I want to show very quickly here, not too long ago, I had one of our students, and you all can see the spreadsheet now, right? That showed up the right way. Yeah,
It's showing, Brad.
Cool. Yes, the IRB issues. We can talk about that in a little bit too. But in preparing for one of the grants that we had proposed recently, I wanted to figure out just how often we asked for to recruit students through the Canvas listserv. And when we first started this in 2019, we had 5 such requests in the entire year of 2019. 1 year later, that had nearly tripled to 14. It nearly doubled again in 2021. We've had 29. And just through the first 5 months of the 2022, we've had 22 such requests. And so those numbers have implications for how much we can tap into a single source to get our student participants. And it also speaks to the growing need that there are an awful lot of researchers, new, emerging, and oftentimes established researchers who really need to get some help in getting good data and getting a lot of participants. And we want to be able to help with that. To do that, and this is really just a follow-up of the previous slide, that the NLTS2 is a data set that has been used for a wonderful collection of articles. However, it's pretty outdated. I believe the data from college is now almost a decade old, maybe more than that, and that the actual identification of the student participants happened when they were in middle school or high school and 20 years ago. And as we all know, that autism and higher education have both changed rather dramatically in those 20 years. And so we need a new source for our data. We talked earlier about the small cohorts. There's also a relatively narrow selection criteria or approach to getting participants. And more often than not, that is either the people you know at your institution, or in a broader sense, you get folks who are pulling from the psych pool, those Psych 101 students who populate so much of psych literature, through autism-specific programs, some of the folks on this call, but also folks that are regularly part of the College Autism Network and at the Summit, who are running programs that we know have these students in them. But again, those students are having some experiences that are very much different than what one would presume is the most common experiences of autistic students not at those autism-specific programs. And beyond that, the DSOs or disability service offices, it's another great way to recruit students if you can go through those offices, because obviously they'll have students who are self-identified as autistic, but there are so many barriers to joining or signing up with a DSO that something like a third, maybe 39% of the students from the NLTS2 data set did not register with their College Disability Services office. So you're missing an awful lot of students when you go through those routes. And then while there are a couple of big data sets, there are some problems with it that make it hard for us to really leverage those data sets in service of our literature. The first is SERP from the UCLA Higher Education Research Institute. SERP is a study that has literally hundreds of thousands of participants every year for like the last 50 years, maybe more than that by now. And it has some great data. And since 2016, I believe they've asked a question every other year, not even every year, but every other year about whether students identify as autistic. But that data is really hard to come by. There's a cost associated with it, that there is a 3-year database embargo or data embargo, so that my student who went looking for it, I think, could get 2016 and 2018, but couldn't get 2020 data yet. And in both the case of SERP and the NLTS2, there are really limited questions that address the needs and the issues, the concerns, the things that matter to autistic college students. So we have an idea that we want to try to address some of those limitations and do a service to the students in our studies and to the research field writ large. So how are we going to do this? We're doing so in several ways, but first off is that we're trying to do so in collaboration. So you already saw on that very first slide, we have, though Brett and I are kind of spearheading it, we've got a core research team that has 4 more folks who are experts in a variety of different disciplines and experiences, practitioners and researchers. Then we also have beyond that, so that's our core research team of 6 total. We have an advisory board of 3 additional folks who are themselves autistic self-advocates, and we're drawing from their expertise regularly. We have also reached out to and coordinated with, particularly with regard to dissemination of recruitment materials, with organizations and offices and a bunch of individuals, particularly autism researchers or autistic self-advocates, that we're trying very much to reach through mechanisms or through people and with people who are bought into the study, who recognize the need, and who have engaged us in meaningful conversation about what type of data is needed for them and for the field, and will help us get that out there. And in return, we've committed to working with them in the dissemination processes as well, that we know that there are multiple audiences that are going to care about this work. We know that there are multiple perspectives on how to interpret the data we're going to get. And so we've made a commitment in turn to ensure that when we are ready to share our data and our results, that we will do so through these organizations, with these organizations, and in ways that reach the people who are outside of the traditional academic space. Second, we are trying to be mindful in our data collection. And to do that, we're trying to be as consistent as possible. We've worked very hard to create a rather comprehensive survey instrument. We'll show you that in a moment. But we want to do that so that we're getting consistent data that is regularly updated over the years. And we envision this, so right now we're getting started. We envision this as a multi-year project, where every year we are repeating the data collection process and presumably, hopefully, expanding the data collection process so that we will be building this database of consistent data over time that will allow some analyses that aren't currently available. And finally, related to that middle point, earlier I just lamented the homogeny of the samples that are in our studies to date, and that we are very much proactively pursuing efforts to maximize the participation and to amplify the voices of minoritized or marginalized populations that have thus far really not been adequately represented in the autism higher education research. And we're doing that in several ways, not least of which is that we are taking our first week and 2 weeks of recruitment, and rather than sending out through the kind of broad traditional approaches or the broad avenues of recruitment, we are working specifically to get our early recruitment message out through autistic self-advocates, through individuals and through organizations that are reflective of a more diverse set of students. And hopefully that will allow us to build a sample that is significantly more diverse than the ones that usually populate our studies. And then finally, this year, though, we're starting with a single survey. That is but one part of our planned data collection. So this year it'll be a survey. It has open-ended and traditional kind of quantitative measures. But over time, we are also, and in our first grant proposal, we proposed doing not only surveys, but also interviews and also photo voice or videos, where we would ask students to take pictures of or do short videos, like, in TikTok style, or not style, but TikTok length videos that capture something that is meaningful about their college experience, and then to write us a caption or a brief explanation of why that matters. So we're trying to reflect we're trying to capture data in a variety of different ways that are also inclusive of the many different ways in which students feel comfortable in sharing that information. So when we do the interviews, for example, we would be open to doing them on the phone. We would be open to doing them through Zoom, through email, or through live chat. We want to make sure that we are wanting to make this as open and inclusive a study as we possibly can. So a little bit about the study itself before I talk to you briefly about the kind of framework behind it, and then we'll get into the survey itself. So start with the eligibility requirements. Right now, we are limited to autistic undergraduates who are currently enrolled in college in the United States. We'll talk a little bit later on. We do have thoughts about down the line expanding it beyond undergraduates and beyond the 50 states. But frankly, in a pragmatic sense, we had to start somewhere, and that was a clean, neat boundary that was also consistent with where we were likely to be able to get funding sources as well. So we're starting there, hoping to expand beyond that. We're also focused in our recruitment, as I mentioned earlier, and working to coordinate with groups and with individuals that will help us reach several of those frequently marginalized communities within autism and higher education research, specifically women, non-binary, racially minoritized, LGBTQ+, and community college students, all of whom have been underrepresented in the research. Finally, the study itself, for this first round, while we are getting it out this fall, it is a compensated 30-minute online survey that does, as I mentioned, have open and closed-end questions. And we really did want to make sure that we were respectful of and appreciative of the students who were taking the time and the effort to complete this survey. And as a result, we made sure that when we were pursuing our initial grant funding, that we included funding to pay the students who did in fact participate. And so for that 30 minutes of, and it varies, right? But 20 to 40 minutes of effort to complete this survey, that we're hooking students up with a $25 gift card. And we think that's, anyway, I feel very pleased that we're able to do that. And likewise, that it's not just the one-time opportunity, that students who complete the survey this year, presuming they are still in college next year, this time of year, a year from now, we will again be pursuing follow-up data from many of those students as well, so that we will be able to build a longitudinal database that will be able to follow a student across the multiple years of their college experience, and that every time we were to collect data from folks in whatever form it would be, that we would again be able to replicate that $25 gift certificate as well. Okay. Wow, I feel like I'm talking at you a whole lot. I'm going to try. Oh, no, darn it. There was a question. Here we go. There was an opportunity for interaction here. All right, we're going to use that chat again. And I want more than one person to do this here. I'm going to be quiet for a full minute. That gives you a full minute to type in here. What I would like you to do is to type in the chat either a draft or a sample or a quick thought about either a research question that you think would be important to answer. So something that you have done or want to do in the future, or a question that you wish others would answer. And if you don't feel comfortable writing a full question right now, I'd like you to go ahead and just write in a topic that you think is important for the future of autism and higher education research to consider.
We have some good ones so far. Variables related to decision to attend college, career and job services. Keep them coming. There's some other things on folks' minds. Katie mentioned student satisfaction with the transition and high school preparation for college. Clarissa mentions disclosure on multiple fronts and training and education. Great. Beth is mentioning high school preparation, the college search, selecting a major career, how they're related. Wes mentions in what ways can community colleges and four-year institutions and other organizations collaborate? There are often disconnects, absolutely. Jill mentions questions about identity and language preferences, knowledge and attitudes of the diversity community and movement, perceptions of belonging, stigma. Yeah, a lot of points. Mary mentions how you disclose to faculty members. Are you going through the formal accommodations process? What concerns may exist? Andrea, successful outcomes comparing students living on campus compared to those who live at home. Yeah, all good points. Brad, do we want to transition, and if other folks want to continue to chime in?
Please, and I'm really thankful that you all put those things in there, because as Brett was reading them off, I was writing a few of them down, and we were conscious of the fact that there are a wide range of research questions that people are interested in, and we wanted to try to cover those bases as best we could. So we looked at inputs, experiences, and outputs. This is from Aston's model. The inputs are the things that happen before they get to college. So those high school experiences, the people in their lives, their personal backgrounds, obviously their college experiences. But then the outputs is effectively the outcomes, right? So traditionally, it is the persistence, graduation, and grades. But we are also looking at things like employment. So we realize that people want to get jobs out of college, and we want to help them. We want to understand the factors that contribute to it. There was a mention of identities. We are explicitly addressing identities. There are certainly academic factors in here, but there's also community or social relationships and feeling comfortable on campus and with your peers. So we have tried to build a survey that is really comprehensive in touching on all of those topics. And so I'm hoping that many of you all who have those research questions will be able to find pieces of our study that you may find useful in your own work. And two other little things that are really distinctive about ours, and I think we've talked about the honoring communities who are overlooked, but more often than, we want to serve the community of scholars by making our data publicly available. It's going to take us a little while to get to that spot. We've got to collect the data, we've got to clean it up, we've got to work on systems to protect it in certain ways, et cetera. But we've already got those systems in the works and being developed so that in the next 2 and 3 years, we want to be able to allow you all to find the data in our data set that will help you answer the questions that you think are important. And doing so provide some consistency to the data and to ease the burden on the students who are already completing these surveys so they don't get bombarded with 50 different requests to complete surveys or participate in interviews. Big thanks real quick to the FAR Fund and the Frisk Center, both of whom have provided some initial seed funding for us. A good portion of this is going to student participants and some of the infrastructure behind it. In a practical sense, down the line, we really do. We need the rather large 6-figure grants if we're going to continue to support the data collection, the cleaning, the analysis, the hosting of the public nature of it, and those kind of things. So if you know of places that would be interested in this kind of work, please don't hesitate to let us know. We certainly want that. All right. Oh my gosh, I'm talking too much. Brett, you should have yelled at me, not just send me a nice little gentle chat. You should have yelled at me.
No, I'll just say that really, I think our goals are threefold. In terms of eventually where we want to get with this. As Brad mentioned, we want to make this a large scale database that folks can draw from, but that is going to require a lot of time and effort and contributions. So our goal for this first iteration of it for this fall is somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 students. That would be one of the larger surveys conducted of autistic college students in the country, quite honestly. And so we really want to be able to do that because that will be that foundation for folks in our community to draw from down the line from the database to address their questions, to be, again, to have this serve as a go-to source for folks, so that, yes, indeed, there'll still be studies independently being conducted, but where this could be supplementary and ultimately maybe providing a greater base for folks, and that notion of expansion to grad students, folks outside the United States. So we've articulated that, and I think we probably want to transition into showing the instrument and then addressing folks' questions and input. Go ahead, Brad. Thanks.
So I'm going to stop my screen sharing for a second so I can show you the other screen where I have the actual survey instrument up. And obviously, we won't have time to go through all of this, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what this in fact looked like. So you all can see the survey instrument now, right? And the little cell phone on the right. Yeah, cool. So we made sure, by the way, that it was also screen reader compatible. It'll be working on cell phones and on the web. This is just our, the opening page, go figure. Brett and I added this within the last 48 hours because within the first 24 hours of the survey being launched, we had several dozen, maybe more than 100 responses that were from bots or fake accounts that were very clearly just trying to get at that $25 gift card, and we're not autistic, we're not even perhaps human. So we've had to add that kind of thing in there, and would be curious from those of you who have done surveys online if you have encountered this problem or have found ways to get around it, because we really don't want 90% of our data to be coming from fake folks. In here, students have to use their .edu email. We ask a variety of questions about their personal identities, their backgrounds, and their personal kind of characteristics, including when they were diagnosed. We are inclusive of students who have a self-diagnosis as well, knowing the cost and the difficulty in getting a formal diagnosis, and that some students don't get diagnosed with autism until they are, in fact, in college. We wanted to make sure that we were inclusive of those folks. We don't assume that they consider autism a disability, but rather allow them to explain that, ask about other disabilities, and a little bit of their high school experience as well. And as you'll note throughout, we have both quantitative and qualitative data collection questions. A little bit more about their college experience, where they are in college, what their majors are, things like that. And if you were to answer yes to this question and you weren't doing it in preview mode, you would be able to tell us a good bit more. There we go, it is work. About your internships and your jobs and whether they're paid or unpaid, because one of the things that we do hear about is that these individuals being exploited in an employment sense and perhaps not being paid or being paid appropriately. And also that, we want to make sure that the work they're doing in their internships does relate to their field of study or their future career. After that, we offer 3 open-ended questions. The quality of data we get from this is incredibly rich. Brett has already seen a few of these things. Whoa, I need to move that out. Brett has already seen some of the data from this, and it's wonderful. You do have some folks who give us 1 and 2 words, but you have some folks who give us 3 and 4 sentences in each of these. But we ask first, what does it mean to them to be successful in college? Again, we don't want to presume that. Then what has been the most helpful? Again, the open-ended questions, we do get some things about high school, we get some things about family, we get a wide range of things here. And then this is the question of like, gee, I wish I had. What is it that you don't have that would be really helpful? Because those are things that maybe we as a field can start to provide. The last bit is a series of questions, and admittedly, this is a little bit long, but there are 3 pages of these things. Hopefully, it's just 1 click per, right? So it hopefully won't take too terribly long. But in essence, we're starting by asking how important each of these things are to their definition of what it means to be successful in college. And as you go through, and we don't have time to show them all off, but if you were to look through these items, we have so many of them in part because we have multiple measures for each of those 5 components of the IPACE model, the identity, psychology, academics, community and social, and employment, that each of those are represented here so that we really do get a sense of what they think of as most important. The next question we ask about is the things that have helped them or may have gotten in their way, that may have actually been harmful. And again, these items all reflect the 5 different domains of IPACE. So you will see things on employment, you will see things about anxiety and psychology, you will see things about personal identity as well. All of these things we're hoping will help us understand not only what students think are successful, but how they're getting to be successful. And then this last one is about how well they are self-assessing. Oftentimes we as researchers or as academics or as administrators or higher education professionals, we are measuring how well they are doing based on some metric that we are setting up. And in this case, what we are going to do for these students is we're asking them to rate how well they are doing on these different components. And these are the same items that were in the earlier question about what they think is important. So one of the future analyses we're going to be able to do is to say, okay, the students who thought that having their most important things for success were community and social, let's see how they rate themselves. And are they rating themselves as doing really well or not so well on those? Or for those students who are rating themselves really well in finding success for community or social relationships, what are the things that they noted as being particularly important to their success in that area? I'll stop sharing again real quick so we can get back to the slides.
And we also want to just say too, as Brad transitions back, is that survey instrument, as you could imagine, has been refined endlessly over the past year, including by our Autistic self-advocate advisory board, other individuals we engaged with. And so we're really excited to see this unfold. And I also want to note that because we're wrapping up, we'll want to transition to partnerships and then get some feedback from all of you. Brad, do you mind if I jump in here? Okay. So as we were saying earlier, we are really wanting to leverage the expertise and influence of folks in the autism community across a variety of spaces and disability community more broadly as well. So we do have engagements, partnerships established with some of these organizations that you see on screen, as well as others. And we certainly recognize that you all are immersed in a variety of spaces that are autism centric. So we will certainly appreciate your support and involvement in this. And similarly too, we recognize that sometimes the best sources of support are fellow autistic folks. And so that's where that individual touch, that one-on-one connection can make a big difference in terms of folks recognizing the value. All of you are engaged in these environments and recognize that you all have cultivated a lot of trust with the autistic folks in your life. So we certainly want to honor that and make sure that we're providing all this context so as to make sure that we have that information. Yep, and so that kind of leads us to our last slide, and ultimately seeking some thoughts and any questions you all may have. We will be sharing this more actively via the College Autism Network community over the coming weeks. As we talked about earlier, we've been really focused intentionally in this first week to for those of us on our team to share it via our social media, to engage with specific folks in the autism community who are autistic, but we really want to broaden this, engage all of you with this. I know some of you who are connected with me on LinkedIn have shared it, and I appreciate that. But we really recognize that reach is so important, as you all may recognize with your own research efforts, but it's also that personal contact, right? If I send a direct message to someone I know who I feel would be interested in completing this, that may go a long way. And so that's where we would really value that engagement. So we're going to be kind of pushing this out over the next month or so, and we just appreciate your time. Brad, I'm not sure if you have any closing thoughts, but we want to turn it over to all of you in terms of your questions and input.
Thank you so much for listening, for engaging, and for many of you who have contributed along the way, and know that we see this as much as us doing something as an effort to serve the field more broadly. So we will welcome your feedback, insight, questions now, later down the line, and we certainly do hope that you will be able to make use of this data in the future. So I'll stop sharing, and I guess at this point, Brett, I think we're really just wanting to see if there are folks who would like to learn a little bit more about study, have questions or suggestions for what we ought to do, are interested in using the data. Just appreciate your feedback and love to hear from you all about your thoughts.
And on a humorous note, Brad and I did not coordinate our clothes for today. We're wearing the exact same shirt, it looks like. So we're good friends, but I don't believe we shop together.
I can't tell if mine is Kohl's or Costco, but if it's not one of those two, I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure it's the same one. Yeah, what are folks? Thanks, Wes, for indulging us with the emoji. Any thoughts or questions about the study? Thanks, Jill. I know for me, it kind of feels like info overload to kind of share what we've been doing over this past year as a team, but yeah, thank you for those comments, Lauren and Wes.
If we have time, I can add a bit about the like potential fraudulent responses, as I've been dealing with that with actually, believe it or not, an interview based. So one of the suggestions is often like, if you're doing a survey, you know, that you might get fraudulent responses, so do a survey or do an interview. But I've gotten some in interviews as well, and it's a long story, so it's hard to distill what's like the big major takeaway. But I would say honestly, just like delaying the link or whatever as long as possible. So like I noticed you say, you'll get the gift card like at the end of the survey, so someone does have to go through and actually answer it first. I think could be helpful. I'd love to hear how it goes for you, because a lot of what you said really resonated with me. There were so many things I was not willing to compromise. Like one solution is like, don't give people compensation. I'm like, no, I'm not willing to do that for all the reasons that you listed. Or, just like make it harder in ways that I worry would make it less accessible. I know you talked about, wanting to make it more accessible, like people can answer in this way, or they can answer in this other way, or they can do it with you or remotely, and those sorts of things. And I think that's just all so important. And so many of the solutions make it harder for people who, you want to participate. Yeah. Screening
Also-
questions. I added screening questions helped. So yeah, before giving them the link to the full consent form even. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Wait, so let me make sure I hear that right. So you had them do something first. There was no link. It was only after they got it. Did you like email them a link, or was it just like the next page would take them, or would give them a new link to click?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that I don't know how well it would work with a survey, right? Because the idea is you can get 300 people and there's not that much work on the back end. You know, and I had a lot of work on the back end, which already should have discouraged people, but I still got some people who were really motivated to get that $25 gift card, which is also what I used. So what I did is someone expressed interest and I would ask some more specific screening questions. And then I would share the link with them, you know, if they could answer those screening questions. But most people didn't try. In one of the links, I did put it in the on the shared document. They also had an autism related survey, and that's what they did end up doing is like the public link had the screening questions, and then people who like passed the screening questions were given the full access to the survey, and that seemed to work well for them. Yeah, so I think there's some space there. It was really interesting, the question that they used. It was for parents, but their screening question was just like, tell us about some services that your child have used, with the idea that services is such a landscape in the US that like anyone who's really involved in the autism world would be able to come up with a sensible response, and those who were not would not. I mean, they would use responses like all of them, and they would say, okay, well, all of them is not a response. So, you know, and for me, I was looking for people in Michigan, so I asked some questions about Michigan, as well as how they heard about the survey, and they did that as well. So how did you hear about it has been helpful. Plus, that's helpful for us to know, like, what's our reach? I don't know.
No, that actually does highlight one of the other challenges for us, is that we don't know which of our recruitment methods is doing the best, like where we're getting most return. So are the one-on-one conversations between friends and colleagues doing it? Did it get sent out on some listserv that happens that we don't even know about, that got reach beyond what we could have anticipated? And unfortunately, we don't have any clever way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for reinforcing that bots are prevalent, and you know, it's been very fascinating to uncover all of this, because some of them look fairly legitimate, but then you look a little bit deeper and aren't quite so. Yeah, Wes says timing is obviously critical. When the survey is sent out can have an effect. I don't know the right time, but definitely not finals. Yes, and that's why we were trying to launch this right after Labor Day, and our hope is to kind of push through this into November, because again, the notion is that this will be presumably a yearly recruitment effort in the fall. So any other thoughts or questions as we wrap up?
Brett, I have a question. This is Katie. Hi, everyone. I am wondering, will you do this again in January for the students who have then had a couple of months in college, like the people who are entering as freshmen? I don't know if they would have enough experience yet to be able to answer some of those questions. Could they do it? Like, could they postpone it till January, or will you release this again in January?
No. But the way you said it made me think about it in a little deeper way than I had than I think I had anticipated. So one clarifying piece is that we're not just looking at freshmen when they come in.
Right.
So in January, like, we're getting sophomores and juniors now who've had that experience. And in a logistical sense, separating out the data collection fall from the data analysis in the spring, rather than kind of an ongoing process. It just, with the amount of funding and time that we're able to put into it, that's as much as I think we can manage at the moment. But your question, though, it prompts another line of thinking that, you know, at the beginning of the school year, you know, a week or two in, does that have, do students have a fundamentally different feeling then than they would, and you talked about timing earlier, Wes, you know, than they would right after, you know, midterm or after spring break or at the beginning of their second semester. So Brett, I hadn't thought of that as a possibility, but I don't think we could do it in the short term, but maybe something to consider longer term.
Yeah, and I love your point, Katie, too, because one of our questions asks about like what year are they in their college experience. So there's the prescribed boxes of freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, but there's also a prefer to self-describe. And so that's an opportunity too for, like, for instance, we could have some folks who are filling it out this fall where they're freshmen, but maybe per your point, maybe they started last January and they ascribe themselves still to that label. So that's going to be really interesting for all of us to uncover in terms of distribution. What I've gleaned so far from the responses is we haven't seen as much in terms of freshmen, but that also would be a huge boon for us in terms of tracking over time that progression of their experience. So yeah, I think those are good questions for us. So yeah, I appreciate that. We are at the hour mark, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If folks do want to stick around to share any observations or questions or feedback, we certainly welcome that. We are going to certainly be disseminating more about the study in the coming weeks on Canvas and in other spaces. We welcome you back to Canvas in October for our meeting with Brian Irvine. So we'll see you then. In the meantime, have a good weekend and thank you. Oh, I think you're muted, Brad, and I'm just going to.
Brett, we might legitimately have the same
hang on,
shirt, and that's disturbing to me. Like, I don't know how that happened. That is genuinely problematic for me.